Okay guys, now that we're in this, step one is gonna be getting yourself a jeweler's loupe. So fakes nowadays have gotten so good that if you don't have a trained eye and you're just getting into learning about spotting fakes, you're not gonna be able to tell what you're looking for just from looking at a watch in person. But after you've gone through this training and you see everything I'm about to show you, this little baby right here will reveal everything you need to know. Now, personally, I always like one with a light on it because lighting situations are not always going to be ideal. When you get up close on this and you're examining the dials and the hands and the markers and everything, a light's going to bring it up and you're really going to be able to see, and you'll have a better understanding after we get done with this. So grab one of these. I'll post a link in the description below pointing you to a couple of them that I really like and that I use on a daily basis. All right, step two is all about buying the seller. So 9 times out of 10, when a seller reaches out to you, or a buyer in this matter, reaches out to you and you get this gut feeling after a little bit of dialogue back and forth, always listen to that gut feeling. You know, a few simple questions to the buyer or seller will let you know if this person's legit or not. Some of the things I always ask them is I'll ask them to change the hands to a specific day and time. If there's a date will on the watch, I ask them to change it to a date. Maybe set the watch down and provide a picture of it with their driver's license in there. What that does is it tells me whether this person, one, has the watch in their possession, and two, if they're going to be compliant. Someone trying to sell me a $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 watch but doesn't have time to take a picture of it, it's probably a scam. So the next thing you want to think about is how and where did you meet this person? Did you reach out to them or did they reach out to you? Are you meeting on a reputable site like Chrono24 or eBay, or something geared more towards local in-person cash transactions like Craigslist, Backpage, OfferUp? Those are a little bit shadier. You need to proceed with a lot more caution, and always listen to your gut instinct. Two more things about that is pricing. Everybody has access to Google these days. Even if you don't know watches, you know how to Google green Submariner and see that prices are anywhere from $18,000 to $25,000. So when someone calls me and they're offering me a Hulk for $11,000 or $8,000 because they just don't know, it's a scam. I can promise you. You're not that good. It's not your lucky day. Don't let greed and emotion get you into making a bad decision. The last thing to watch out for when it comes to buying the seller is listen for the story. All scammers have a story. Most common being they've inherited the watch from a deceased family member. They were in the military and they're getting this gift from overseas, so they're for another relative or a friend, yada, yada, yada. There's always a story, and they start to get consistent. So be mindful of that. You know, example, whenever I call someone to sell them a watch, I don't tell them what my kindergarten was like. I say, here's what I have, here's the specs, here's the price, do you want it? That's what you need to remember. So pricing, story, how you met this person, and just your overall gut feeling. We're gonna start looking at these watches, and what I have here is I have a fake, a Frankenstein, and an authentic watch. Okay guys, so here we have 3 watches, and these are what I'm going to be going over with some pictures, but I wanted to show you these on a video real quick, side by side. So what we have here is the fake watch is going to be the one to the far left. In the center, you have the Frankenstein, which is a hyperclone, and then over here you have the authentic one. So throughout the video and these sets of pictures, the first watch I refer to is always going to be the fake. The second is always going to be the hyperclone or Frankenstein, and the third is always going to be the authentic. So I'll give you just another second real quick to see these up close. Sorry on the lighting, guys, it's kind of tricky right now. But anyway, let's dive into some pictures and let's get learning. We're going to jump in. I'm going to use a bunch of pictures. So here is again the fake, and I want you to scan around it real quick and just see if you notice anything. And don't worry if you don't notice them right now. At the end of this video, you'll definitely know what you're looking at. I just wanted you to see real quick so you can kind of see how far along they've come. Now, here is the hyperclone, which if you're not familiar with a hyperclone or a Frankenstein, what it is, it's actually a fake watch that they've incorporated real Rolex parts on to fool you. So it is still a fake watch, but it does have parts of it that are authentic. So I will show you those as well. And then lastly, here is the authentic. Okay, so we are going to hop straight in. Now, the first thing I always look for when I look at a watch and I'm scanning is the hands. And when you look right here at the Mercedes hands and the baton and the sweeper hand, as you look around it, you see that rough finishing all over it, which you look like speckles and poor machining. And it looks like these things were very roughly cut out of a sheet of metal. Then you hop over here to the fake, and they are a little bit better, but as you can see right around that Mercedes hinge, you can still see that rough machining. You can see these little chips right here. You can see the center pivot where these are all fixated. That's rough, it's not correct. And then you compare it to the authentic, which is, now these are light reflections right there, but you scan around these and they're absolutely perfect. So first thing I always look at is the hands, but you want to be careful too, because one of the things that they are doing on fakes nowadays is they're replacing the hands with authentic hands. So this goes back to not only using one tell. Second thing I like to look at is the pearl. Now, first thing when you immediately look at this is you notice how messy it is. If you haven't ever seen this and studied it, you won't be able to gauge the depth of the pearl, but the size of the pearl is incorrect. If you look at this machining and the paint inside the triangle, on a real Rolex, that's infused with platinum, and it's supposed to have this very fine sandpaper-y look, where this has a rough, coarse sand look. And then again, you look at the triangle, look around the edges and see how rough it is. Hop over here. This is the Hyperclone, and while it is a little bit better, that paint almost looks a little bit better, and that triangle almost looks a little better done, it's still very rough overall. The pearl is still too small. Hop over here and we're going to compare that. It's night and day. Beautiful fluorescent pearl, that sandpapery white paint, clean sharp edges. So when you compare the two, you can see that. Okay, next thing you want to look at is the bezel markers. Again, here on the fake. Remember that term I used, roughly finished? Look at the insides of this. Look how filthy it looks. Look at the paint. There's no platinum infused in this paint, so it's hard to keep a consistent texture. The poor machining around it. Overall, it just looks rough and dirty. You hop over to the Hyperclone. Now, what they've done here is they've actually used an authentic bezel. It was just poorly put on. So you can still see some rough machining around there, and they didn't quite get the paint correct. Then you hop over here and you compare it to a real bezel. Platinum infused paint is perfect. The edges are clean and crisp and sharp, and the depth is correct. Next thing you want to do is you want to look at the date wheel. Now, here's where one of those things are going to fool you is this is the fake watch, but this is a real date wheel. If you hop over to the Hyperclone, they have also used a real date wheel. Compare it to the authentic watch, a real date wheel. So if your only tell was to look and see on splotchy paint, now I'll pop a picture up here right now showing you an example of splotchy paint on this thing. This is an obvious giveaway if I were to see this, but when you're dealing with these watches, what I recommend you do is flip through the date wheel, look at all the numbers, and look at a multitude of them. One set of numbers might look good, but if it is a fake date wheel, you are going to get to them where the paint is splotchy, and it's a good tell. Next thing you want to look at is the crown. Pop the crown open and turn it. First off, turn it like you're going to power the watch up. Is it rough and grainy feeling, or does it turn smooth like a Rolex? A Rolex, especially a new one like this, should turn buttery smooth and not have any grinding noises or resistance against it. Now, one thing I caution you on is that if a watch has been very poorly treated and damaged, it may have some rough grinding. It's in need of a service. Again, don't ever use one tell. But here, what we're looking at, aside from twisting the crown, is when you look at this gasket and you look at the ridges right here, you can see how rough, again, rough machining. You can see how on the rivets down here, the dips in the crown, I'll show you these later from a sideward view, but those mountaintops, they are the valleys in them. If you look at these as mountains and valleys, the valleys down here go way too low. They come way too close to the base of the crown. On the authentic crown, it's about half that size. But you look at the machining on the gaskets, you look at the machining or the finish on the gasket, and it looks real rough. It looks like it's been scraped, and again, roughly finished. Now we're going to hop over to the hyperclone. Same thing. Very rough finishing. The ridges are way too deep. You can also look on those triangles and see how uneven they are. Again, very rough, poorly made gasket. Compare it to the new. Perfect. Now you can see how those those ridges in the mountaintops go only about, I'd say, what is that, 2/3 of the way down, where on the fake and the hyperclone they were almost touching. You look at the gasket, it's very clean. You look at the rivets, they're very smooth. You look at the lines in these mountaintops and these V's, and they're straight and they're consistent. Now here what we're looking at is the dial. You see this green texture-y, it's kind of messy and wavy. This is a fake right here. And the green is too bright. Now, if you don't have something to compare to, it's going to be a lot harder to tell. So what you're looking for is, if you're looking at this right here alone, it's going to be hard to tell. But then when you're comparing it with those hands in front of it, if you've got dirty hands like this and you've got this very messy looking dial, that's a good sign. Now compare this to the hyperclone. This is indeed also a fake dial, but you can see they got the green a little bit more rich, or richer, however you want to say it. But when you compare it to the authentic, look at how rich this green looks. And you can see those straight lines, that perfect even texture throughout the dial versus this and this. All right, on to the next thing. So here what we're looking at is the markers, better known as the numbers. So this rectangular right here, this circle, these are called markers. Now, again, if you haven't studied these things and you haven't looked at them, you're not going to know the appropriate size, but that ring around it, that silver you see, that's called an index. On an authentic watch, these are made of white gold, and they're going to have a look of white gold. They're also going to be filled out and shaped perfectly. As you can see, these have rough finishing on the edges. The inside triangle, or I'm sorry, the inside rectangle, it's kind of rounded on the bottom one, but then it's more squared on the top. That is not consistent with an authentic. Here, again, same thing. Look at the poor machining on this. It's the wrong paint. The indexes are actually a little too small to be able to tell, but without a comparable, it's hard to notice that. Then you look at these two right here. It's got the obvious look of white gold if you're familiar with seeing this. The paint infused, it's a thicker index. Let's take a look at this. Okay guys, the next thing I want you to look at is the font. Now, one thing I want to point out is fonts are getting really good, but one thing they haven't managed to perfect is the difference in dial variations. And for the Hulk specifically, there's 3 known dial variations, and that is the MK1, the MK2, and the MK3. Now, I got my information from a website called The Manifest Online, and I'm going to link that below, and it's a great resource on these different dials, on the different Submariner dial variations. So I want you to read up on that, and you'll be amazed at how precise this is and how much you'll learn just from looking at this dial. But the quick tell on this for me is this font is replicating that of an MK1 dial. However, if you notice, it's all in bold, and the bold didn't start till the MK3 dial. This font, the font is correct. I'm sorry, the style is correct, but the font should be a sans serif font. You hop over here. One thing you notice is that the F is a little bit larger than the T. However, over here, it's definitively larger, and this is the correct font for this. It's just you've also got a mixture of sans serif and bold. So click on that link below, and I want you to study the fonts, and you'll see the difference in spacing, the boldness, and the layout of this. The next thing I want you to look at is the laser etched crystal. Now, here's where I want you to be careful. Is you see this crystal right here. When you're looking at the picture, if you look at the stems of this, all the dots are pretty perfectly in line. They look good. The circle at the bottom, the little loop, It's not too definitive. It's not overbearing. It's about the right size. Hop over to the next dial, and you look at this as well. All the specs are just in line. All the little dots are in line, same as the last one. And then you look at that circle. It's a perfect, well, that oval. It's a nice size oval, but not too big. And then you hop over to this one. And I'm sorry I caught that picture with the marker in the background, so it's kind of blurring the top of it out. But look at those two left stems. See how splotchy looking that is? And it's kind of uneven and looks very poorly done. This is actually a real one. This is the real laser etched crystal. But the fake watch also has, oh, I'm sorry, the hyperclone also has an authentic crystal. So you have two authentic crystals right here. This one looks almost perfect and nearly matches the one that is indeed fake. But then when you look at the other authentic, it looks nothing near like what the other authentic one is. So again, you got to be careful on that. All right, on to the next thing. We're going to hop down. We've already talked about the bezel markers once, but I want to just show these again. This is the 6 o'clock 30-minute marker on the bezel, and you can just see how terribly done this is. Poor machine quality, paint coming up, chipping. Again, a little bit better, but still an obvious, very, very poor quality. Hop over to the real. It's just perfect. It's night and day. And then look at that green rich texture around it when you compare it back to this. On this one, you've got fading. See where that dark green fades to a light green around the rim of the bezel? And then here, it's just a dull tone. It's just too flat all the way around it. Okay, the next thing I want you to look at is these ridges along the bezel. Now, on a fake, again, roughly finished, poor tabletops. One common thing you're going to see is on these tabletops right here on the points, they're either going to be too rounded or too sharp. You run your finger around them and it's going to feel sharp. But another thing to notice is at the bottom of these concaves, you can see the distance between the bottom and the edge of the bezel. It doesn't match right here. Hop over here. Looks a little bit better, yet you can see how rounded these are. Again, rough machining around it the whole way. And then if you were to look at the size of the tabletops, they're not the same. Then you compare that over here. The size of the tabletops are identical. The distance between the bottom of the concave and the bezel are all perfect. The texture in the concave is correct. The finish on the bezel is smooth all across the top of there. So that's another thing to look for. Okay guys, now we're going to get into looking at the rehaut engraving. So used to, you could tell because it was very sloppy and very poorly done, but what you're seeing right here, this is a laser engraving when, I'm sorry, a laser inscription when the authentics do an actual engraving like this. Now, here on the hyperclone, they did an engraving, it's just not as deep. This is the correct, oops, sorry. So this is the correct. If you look around the edge of the letters, you can see that they're perfectly, and I'm sorry on the blurriness of the video, but when you're scanning around this, the letters are going to be straight and not sloppy. If you hop over here to this fake, you can see how poorly looking they are, and if you can tell the difference between a laser etching and an actual engraving, you can immediately tell that this is just on the surface of the metal, whereas these two, this is an engraving, it's just not correct, it's not straight. This one is an engraving, it's dug into the metal, the lines are sharp and crisp. One thing I will notice, and they're pretty spot on about it, but if you're looking at the rehaut engraving and you look from the 12 o'clock to the 6 o'clock side, the X is always going to line up perfectly with the hour marker. And when you go from 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, the R should always line up perfectly with the hour marker. Okay, on to the next thing. So we already talked a little bit about the crown and about how you should unscrew it and give it a turn and kind of gauge it from there. But I wanted to talk here about those mountaintops. So you see those mountaintops and then the valley that goes in them. Look at how it goes all the way down to the bottom of it, to the crown. Then you compare that over here and then to here. See how this only goes, these concaves only go about halfway, and what I'm talking about is that little tabletop, that V that you see right there. It doesn't go all the way down to the base. Here it does. Next thing we're looking at is flip open the clasp. Now this is the fake, and the clasp was actually, the lockable part of the clasp fell off. But what we're looking at is this little indentation right here. So when you look at that, and then you compare it to this, and then you compare it to this, you see how much deeper and how much wider that one is. So that's the tell right there, is that the size is just too small. Now there are some people that will tell you to look at the finishing, and if you were to look at the finishing on this watch compared to the finishing on this watch compared to the finishing on this obviously terrible fake, I'll tell you, don't ever use the finishing as a thing, because I've seen very good polish jobs on fake watches, and I've seen very bad polish jobs on real watches. Next thing I want to show you is so this one again, like I said, it's missing the Rolex clasp, but I want you to look at the crown. Now this is on the Hyperclone, and this is on the Authentic. Again, look at the machining quality of the metal is the first thing. They polished, it looks like they tried to polish this to match the clasp, whereas this has its own satin finish. The other thing I want you to look at is, look at the circle at the base of the crown. Very tiny, very dinky. And this is a nice oval that goes, that fits well and just matches. It looks right. The other thing you want to look for is, a lot of times these fakes have cut this crown out of a separate sheet of metal, and the process of attaching it to the clasp is just simply welding it on. So when you get your loop and you start looking around the edges of this crown, you'll start seeing very uneven, what looks like weld marks. So I don't have it sideways to show you that, but you'll know what I'm talking about if you ever get under it and look at the loop. But the main thing to notice is, look at how they tried to polish this crown to match the finish of the clasp. Okay, now I already mentioned about the polish job. This is the polish job on the fake, and what I would point out here is that it's very uneven textures. It's very different, or it's different depths of thickness, but you can't use that as a tell, because I've seen very bad polish jobs on very real watches. And then again, you see Rolex is perfect all around. Next thing you're going to look at is flip the clasp open, and again, a very poor laser etching. You look in, you scan all the way around it. Don't just look at one part, you got to scan all the way around it. If you scan in here, you can see how rough and uneven it is. These little ridges are all uneven. The letters are not properly lined up and come to square points. That E, it looks it's very poor. Same thing here, just very sloppy looking. And then you get to this one, and it's an actual engraving, and it's perfect. Again, these are gonna come down to seeing them time and time again and being able to spot the difference in a cheap laser etching and an actual engraving. Next thing I want you to look at the Geneva Swiss made mark. First thing you should be able to tell right here is the V and the A in Geneva are much smaller, and they're a little bit higher than the rest of the words. So if you were to draw a straight line under each of these words, the V and the A would sit high. Same with the Swiss made out here. If you look at this correctly, it's actually positioned almost in an upward angle. You can see on the on the S's in Swiss made, you can see the bottom hoop of it, or the loop of that is larger. It's smaller than the top on all three of those S's. You flip over here and it's the reverse. The top of the S's are smaller than the bottom. So you've got an uneven S. Again, you have that VA that's the A is too high, it's too small for one, and it's too high. Then you hop over to the authentic. Again, laser etching, also too thin. Laser etching that's bold. It's bolder to match it, but the straightness is not correct. You hop over to the authentic, it's a perfect engraving. If you were to draw a straight line or put a ruler underneath that, all those letters would sit on it toply. Look at the hoops on the S. All of them are even. Hop over to the next thing. Again, very poor quality. Uneven letters. Let's see. This is an engraving. You've got very, very thick engraving on the Rolex SA. Too thin, very cheap looking. The letters, the X is too short. Now we're going to take the bracelet off and look at the clasp. Now here's one thing. An old tell used to be that they are only doing a laser etching on these where the serial number and the word stainless steel go in the case. But now this is an actual engraving. But one thing I'll point out on this engraving is, unlike this, see how thin and perfect or thin and straight these lines are? Here they overcompensated because they thought, well, if this person is going to pop the bracelet off and they're going to see that this is actual engraved and it's going to fool them because you don't know the correct thickness of this. But this is an actual engraving, but it is too thick. Here is a laser etching that was cheaply done. It was the right size and everything, but it's a laser etching and not an engraving. Here is the correct one. Here it is again up close. So you can see once you're able to spot well, you may not be able to spot that the thickness is too wrong, but look at the machining around the rest of it. It's almost as if this watch were 40 years old and it's less than 8, even at its oldest. Again, here's just another view of that laser etching that's very poorly done. And the authentic, which is the correct height. Look at the machining quality and the edges around there, whereas on the first one you can just see how rough and beat up it is. All right, now we're going to get into the movement. So here is a fake movement, and if you have never studied a movement, you know, the first thing you're going to see right here, and a lot of people that do not know the movements of these watches and haven't seen it, they say, yes, this is a real watch. And I'll tell you why. Because they're looking around the dial and they're seeing different colors, they're seeing multiple parts, they're seeing all this texture right here on the balance, which is right here. And it fools them because they've never studied these watches. But the tell on this fake, and I'll explain it here a little bit better, is the balance. What you see are these two forks coming out from where that jewel is. That makes this a traditional balance, and the 3135 is not a traditional balance, it's a free sprung balance, which means it is only going to have a single fork like this. Now, this is the hyperclone watch, but what you are looking at is in fact an authentic 3135 movement. Now, why this is wrong is that this is a ceramic date model that comes with a 3135 movement, but the ceramic date models came with the blue parachrome hairspring. See that little blue spring right there? I'm going to get in there. I'm going to show you a video here in a minute so you can see it in action. But you see that blue spring under there? This is also a 3135 movement, but this is the newer updated. This is the older one. So this is likely from a Datejust model. But if you know your movements and you've studied it and you open this case back up and you know that the ceramic is supposed to have a blue parachrome hairspring, not that silver one, then you'll understand why this is wrong. And then taking a look at this, here you go. Now, one thing I want you to pop back around, actually, I'm going to flip to another video and I'm going to show you this. But again, here is that traditional balance. So the first thing, you see those two forks coming off, that's already wrong. But then scan around the rest of it and you're going to see like they've tried to replicate the finish out and the texture along these, but you can see how these circles aren't completed. It's very rough. It's very poor machining around all of these. Even as the fake movement, it's very poor machining around that. Again, here is the real movement. It's just the wrong balance it's the wrong movement for the current watch. But here you can see this has the silver hairspring. This has the blue parachrome hairspring. Now here, what I'm looking at is the 3135 stamp. Looks great. It's nice and thick. Problem is, on the real watches, it was not thick. You also notice that this has a yellowish color. It's thin and has a yellowish color, as well as the authentic, very thin font, has a color of yellow. But you flip back over to this one, it's way too thick and fat, and it's like a cheesy orange. So there you go. Again, that comes with knowing the watch, knowing the models. Let's hop over here. So right here, first glance, you're seeing all these shades of white, gray, and black. That's just rough, uneven machining. When they were filling in this texture, they don't have precise machines. They don't take their time. It's just kind of a churn up as many of these as you want. And that's why you get all these different colors, or these different shades of gray on there. You look at this one. This is an older movement, so you can kind of start to see where there's a little bit of difference in there, but overall this is a clean looking watch and the font is correct. And then obviously you get to the thick, the texture is all even, the lines are perfect. You don't see all those different shades of black and gray. Again, here is the same fake watch from another angle. You can see all this different texture. When you zoom in, if you were to look at this movement through a loop, look at that circle. Look at how much damage there is around the circle, and how rough they were when they were putting these things together. This is an authentic movement. It's just a little bit older from a date just. So it's got some normal wear, but you can see that the lines and the texture are still consistent. And then here is the obvious authentic. One other thing that I will show you is that the jewels right here, these purplish looking things, if you're not familiar with them, the jewels are set in place to kind of counteract with balance and magnetism. Here they match the same. They're the same colors, and they are actual jewels. Hop over here to the fake. These are just pieces of metal that were painted, and you can see they're two different colors. Here's all three of the watches next to each other, but I'm going to flip over to another one. So here they all are, three in next to each other running. I'm going to zoom in real quick just so you can kind of see them in action. Again, first glance, I'm sorry it's a little bit bright, but just very rough, very poor looking put together. Here, this is the correct movement, but you can see that it's, again, just the silver hairspring, not the blue parachrome hairspring. And then here it's excellent quality with the blue parachrome hairspring. Here's the fake. Again, you look in there, you see how they tried to replicate the texture, but they overdid it. Here is the authentic. It's just the wrong hairspring. And the authentic. All right, guys, I hope you got a lot out of that video and are now feel like you're more aware of things you can look for that maybe you didn't know before. I want you to rewind back to the beginning of this video and take a look at when I was first showing you those watches and see if you can spot some of this stuff now that you know some things to look for. And then going forward, if you've got access to authentic watches, maybe you've got friends that have them that you can look at, or maybe you have some of your own, start looking at these dials and the bezels and everything under a loop and start training your eye and your mind to see what perfect looks like. And what's going to happen is the more of these you see, when you do come across a fake, you're instantly going to say something looks off, and you're going to start scanning around and you're going to know right away. So start training your mind like that. And guys, if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button.